Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab, all on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Good afternoon, and good morning, and good evening. Welcome to CSIS, wherever you're watching today. I'm Scott Kennedy. I'm trustee chair in Chinese business economics here at CSIS. We are delighted to have you here for today's program, where we're going to introduce the findings from Scott Rozelle and Natalie Hell's new book, Invisible China. 1 in 9 people in the world live in rural China. That's 850 million people out of 7.8 billion on this planet. They matter to China's story, and they matter to the world's story, but they are poorly understood by most of us. Scott Rozelle and Natalie Hell, in their new book, Invisible China, try to make them visible to us, to tell their story. Today, we've invited Scott Rozelle to give a brief introduction to their book, and then we'll have a discussion about what their findings mean for China and the United States. This isn't the first time that we've had Scott for a program. He was here at CSIS a little over 3 years ago. In fact, physically in the building at CSIS, giving a presentation on some of the early conclusions from this research. The audience can submit questions today via the event homepage, and we'll get to your questions soon. But by way of background, let me first introduce Professor Rozelle. He's a senior fellow at the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies and the Helen F. Farnsworth Endowed Professor at Stanford University. He also co-directs their Rural Education Action Program. He is, in my judgment, the single most knowledgeable expert there is about rural China anywhere. He's been doing field research in China for 4 decades. And this book is in some ways a distillation of a life's work. And so it's a real honor to be able to host him today to present a life's work of findings about Invisible China, Invisible No More to Us. I'm going to turn the floor over to Scott now. He's going to introduce his book, and then we'll come back for a conversation with him. Professor Rozelle, thank you for being with us today and for this book.
Good. Let me share my screen. Thank you, Scott and Alyssa, Clifton, and the whole team here. There we go. Yes, it's, my real pleasure to be here. Again, we were talking ahead of time. I wish I was in Washington, D.C. and could give this talk and interact with everyone and at a much deeper level. Let me give a few background minutes, about 20 minutes here, and then we can sort of dig down to where you guys really want to go, right? I always want to start out by making it clear is, this isn't a China bashing book. You're going to hear me say some pretty sort of negative things about China and maybe some of the sources of the problem. But like I say in the bottom, it's not a PC thing to say, maybe especially in Washington, but I want China to succeed. I think, and I want them to succeed for humanistic reasons. I've spent 40 years in rural China, have friends there, and the people there work hard for that reason, for economic reason, for China, the US, and the world. And I think we just don't understand this well enough now, but also for the overall good. And overall good for an economist means everything else like military and social unrest. It's a political problem. So I think for those reasons, we want a stable, thriving China. And so I'm, this is trying to address these issues. Okay. So what's Invisible China? Scott Kennedy already told you, it's rural China. It's 840 million people. It's a ninth, a tenth of the world population, 2 U.S. populations, right? These are the people from rural China, right? They're the workers in the factories or the self-employed service sector. I'm going to tell you a lot about these informal workers today. They run the farms. And then, of course, they're the elderly left in the villages, the children left in the villages, and then the children in the families that come with the families into the migrant communities around China's big cities. So when I first started working in China in the early 1980s, more than 85% of the Chinese lived in rural communities. A higher percent, even those who were in the cities, had grandparents and parents and brothers and sisters that were farming and working in rural China, on farms and in rural factories. In those days, college students, professionals, government officials came from these farming communities. They went back and forth between their lives in the cities and their immediate families. They knew what was happening out there. And when one went across a country, China's road system was horrible. So you got on a bus and you didn't make it very far in a day, and you had to stay in these little inns and villages and eat in the farmhouse restaurants. People knew what rural China was like. It wasn't invisible 30 to 40 years ago, okay? But today, it's so different, right? Less than 5% of students in elite universities in China have any rural roots. Sounds like problems at our university with certain groups of individuals. If you don't fly across the country today, you get on a 350 kilometer per hour high-speed rail, and you can't even take a photo of a farm or a village road. And of course, the media, they focus on what's happening in Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, right? And we get no glimpse of this other China, the invisible China. It's invisible, okay? That's sort of the premise of this. And Scott sort of told you that I've been doing a field work for a long time. It's true. We've done, I've done surveys in every single province and municipality in China except for Tianjin and Shanxi province, okay? And all the rest of them. And I've visited more than 650 counties. My team, not me, I haven't done 1 million surveys, but our team has done more than 1 million surveys over these years. Tens of thousands of villages, tens of thousands of schools, thousands of businesses, rural factories. Okay, so that's the empirical basis for the book. Scott's already sort of said that. Okay, so let's get on to this. How does the invisible China threatens China's rise? I'm going to back off and try to put it into international perspective first. And these are about the only slides that I used in the last presentation that I was at the CSIS probably 3 or 4 years ago. I can't remember exactly when, but it's a very important graph. Okay, on the horizontal axis, this is income 70 years ago, and here's income today. And so these low income, so these are the Myanmars and the Congos down here, and here are the OECD countries. Okay, the France, Canada, United States, Japan. Okay, they were rich, high income 70 years ago, and high income today. The two sets of countries that I'm interested in sort of comparing, that I want to try to really motivate what the problem China's facing is, here are the graduates. And look at this, there's only 15 of them. 15 countries are the only countries that have gone from middle income to high income in the last 50 years, 60 years. This is a hard thing to do, right? It's the South Koreas and the Irelands and the Singapores and Taiwans, okay? While most of the countries in the world are the trapped. So they've spent 70 years there, right? And so the question is, of course, is what is different between them and them, right? These two sets of countries. One fundamental difference is at the time of middle income, these graduates have had in labor forces, the entire labor force, right, 18 to 65, who are quite well educated, okay? So they're already educated when they're middle income, okay? And so look at this, here's OECD. So these are the rich countries, right? 7 to 8 out of 10 people, individuals between 18 and 65, and they have been to high school, okay? Look at this, middle income grads, it's exactly the same. So they already had high level, high income nation levels of education when they were middle income, okay? And so, of course, the thing is when they move up into, high income, is that their labor force are going to have those skills that they're going to be able to learn and adapt. But look at the trapped, okay? They're very, very different, less than half, right? So the Turkeys, the Brazils, Mexico, South Africas, on average, there's only 3 or maybe 4 people per 10. So most of the people, 6 or 7 of the people in this economy, right, in these economies, as they try to push themselves up to high income, right, when jobs really change, when you're switching jobs and there's new, you need to learn how to learn constantly, they don't even have a high school education. They're high school dropouts, and they're really struggle to try to adapt themselves to these new economic horns. And so look at the differences there. So when a country moves from middle income to high income, wages rise, the nature of work changes from low skill to high school. And if a large share of that labor force isn't able to participate, you get polarization. You're going to get high unemployment, crime, social unrest, a high rise of informality. I'm going to spend a lot of time on this, which is some new work I'm doing. Today, I'm going to tell you in advance, today, most of China's labor force, according to their own statistic, is in the informal labor force. And that's what characterizes these other countries. And of course, once you get crime and social unrest, unemployment, you have low productivity, you have supply problems, nobody wants to invest, and you get this stagnation and polarization, and you sink back into this trap. Okay, so what happened? Let me look at all these countries of the world, okay? The Argentinas, the Brazil, almost half of Brazil, 45% of Brazil, they're in an informal sector. There's no benefits, no working hours, there's no regulations. They're outside the main economy, right? And it's true here for Indonesia, for India, for Mexico, right? Just it's everywhere, okay? That these are the middle income countries are dominated by these informal sectors. And you see, they set up stands, they pedal through the streets, they move into slums, right? And they live on the edge, right? This is a really important talk. It's by a professor. He used to be at Harvard. Now he's at the Inter-American Development Bank, your neighbors over there. His name is Santiago Levy. And he talks about Mexico. So he explains Mexico. They've done it right. It sounds like China. They got good macroeconomic performance. China. They have good export success. China. They had this is Mexico in the 1980s. They've accumulated enough physical capital, but they don't have any growth. Why? Productivity stagnated. Why? The informal sector is too big. You just saw it. 60% of Mexico is in this informal sector. It's so large it actually pulls down the formal sector, and it creates all these social burdens. Okay, that's Mexico. Why? Because Mexico's human capital is not sufficient. 3 or 4 out of 10 Mexican laborers have ever been to high school, okay? And they can't operate in this high tech, high income, high skill economy, right? They get shifted out and polarized away from it, okay? Okay, so it's at this point in time or sometime during my talk, in fact, when I've been trying to set up this book talk, people respond back to me and say, what are you trying to sell this book for? I mean, hasn't China already made it? Okay. This book is 10 years too late. Okay. But remember what people said about Mexico in the late 1980s. Okay. 1980s, it was almost high income. They entered OECD. They were part of the high income club of the world, right? Mexico at that time was called the next Taiwan. It's made it already, right? Okay. Wow. I mean, since 1994, Mexico hasn't grown at all, right? So, okay. I'm done with the rest of the world, and those are sort of the motivation of it. So let's talk about China. And yes, China is here. It's middle income. Okay, it was middle income, lower middle income 30 or 40 years ago, and it's upper middle income now. Okay, and doing quite well, thank you. Okay. And so summarizing above, all those kids don't need to call to college. Every child, people in the labor force should have a high school education if this country is going to move up to high income, right? It's at this critical stage where everybody gets the skills they'll need to know in the future. So where's China? Okay, I made this statement in CSIS about 5 years ago, and it's still true today. China has the lowest level of human capital in the entire middle income world. Number one. China is number one. They're the lowest in the whole middle income world. And that's not my data. That's China's data. The 2015 census, it's a little 1.3 billion person census. They didn't end this census early, by the way. They got to all 1.3 billion people and asked them what their education level was, and only 30% of them had ever been to high school. Some of them didn't finish high school, by the way. But this is 30% who had ever been to high school. All the rest of them, the other 70% of them were high school dropouts, had never been there. And you can see China here is lower than South Africa. It's lower than Mexico, lower than Turkey. Okay, it's China has a really, really poorly educated labor force. 70% of them are high school dropouts. Okay, what are they going to be doing over the next 30 years, right? As China moves up to here, okay? I want to show you some new data, okay? And is there any evidence that this is affecting China's economy today, okay? This is also using government statistics, not our great primary million observations. This is government statistics, and we're going to look at two economic indicators, employment and wages. And look at here, 15 years ago, China looked pretty healthy. 70% of employment was in the formal sector. Okay, so people had a job, they had benefits, they were regulated, right? That they were part of this the China. But look what's happened over the last 15 years. By 2017, it's now less than 45%. It's like 57% of workers now are now in this informal sector. It's swapped around, okay? Just like Turkey, just like Mexico, just like Indonesia, right? And look at this. What's the fastest growing sector in the whole Chinese economy? There's only actually two sectors that are growing. Look at this skill intensive sector. That's professional jobs, okay? The doctors, the managers, the teachers, those are rising. But what's rising much, much faster than that is the labor intensive service sector, the informal sector. Okay, it's called informal sector in Chinese statistics. Manufacturing is falling, construction's falling, farming jobs are falling. Okay, informal sector is growing, and look. Let me take them and look what's happened to the growth of wages. The informal sector is growing. That the formal professional sector, right? Those guys that work in DC and in Silicon Valley. it's still growing, okay? And guess what? The informal sector, the growth rate's falling, okay? We're getting a polarization, just like we see in the rest of that middle income world. And this has been going on for the past, the wages for the past 5 years, the employment for the past 15 years. Why are wages falling? Rising supply of informal workers. There's no more jobs. There's no more jobs in manufacturing, construction, agriculture. So the laid off workers and the new entrants have one option only, the informal low skill service sector. And if the number of workers rises faster than the demand for services, guess what happens to wages? They fall, right? So what's driving these trends? What's creating these trends? Let me tell you, it's very easy. Robots. Okay. Globalization. Let me look at this. Levi's are now made in Ethiopia. And Chinese firms, there's more Chinese firms in Bangladesh than any other country in the world using cheap South Asian labor. Samsung assembles all of his electronics now in Vietnam. Okay. And of course, there's COVID-19 and the global recession, which is just going to, just make this worse. So should we expect more of this in the future? Look at those trends of robots in China. I mean, they are only going up and up and up. And China has the Made in 25 that you don't talk about anymore because, got so much bad press. But the focus is on automating Chinese factories, okay? And global supply chain shifts are going to happen with or without COVID-19, but with COVID-19 and the pressure, the strained relations between China and the U.S. and China and the rest of the world, this is going to happen a lot. So is it going to keep going? Are we going to get more of this polarization? Probably, maybe. I mean, that's, we'll see. I think so. Okay, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on this next one. I know my time is short. People often ask me at this point, doesn't anyone in China know about this? Okay. Is it a secret? In fact, I say no. The current government's investment behavior shows that it's concerned about the education labor force, and they're doing something about it. Look at this. So now, just remember, I've been talking now about the whole labor force. This is just the 15 and 16-year-olds, okay? So these are just the high school age kids. And in 2005, only half of them had ever been to high school. Today, they've almost all been to high school. That over these past 10 years, 15 years, there's been 10 million new slots in high school. Suddenly China said, oh my God, if people don't know, I haven't been to high school, they're not going to be able to get a job, right? You remember the labor force though is all those people that haven't been to high school. Okay. So they're doing the right thing. They go, we might as well start now and cut our losses. Okay. And they want to universally high school by 2020. So where's the problem? Well, the problem is in rural youth, right? More urban is fine. Still 30% of rural kids have never been to high school yet. So if they're going to universalize high school attendance, they need to focus on rural youth. And even today, over 50% of rural youth in poor, the Central China, Western China have never been to high school. So it's these guys that they really have to go. So I like to make this comparison. What does China look like? Does China look like this Asia miracle, right? The Taiwan as such. Look at this. When they were middle income, every single person in their labor force had already gone to high school, or most of them, okay? That's incredible, right? When they were still middle income. Look at Mexico. Look at that. That's why Mexico has so many problems. These are the ones that have gone into the informal economy. Who does China look like? Wow, they're looking almost exactly like Mexico in the 1980s, right? And the same thing is, what are those, 500 million high school dropouts? What are they going to do as China becomes this high wage, high skill economy? So the challenge of the government is twofold. One is to get all those poor students into high school. Can China do that? China can do anything. They can stop COVID-19 in 6 weeks. They can get poor rural kids into high school. But the real question is once they're in high school, are they going to be able to learn? We got all these adults who are losing their jobs. Can we do adult education? Will they be able to learn in adult education, learn these new skills? The second question, are they going to be able to learn when they're in high school, is precisely the problem. According to our research, and this is what our book really spends time in, this is what our 30 years of research, there's a large share of rural people that don't have the skills to learn how to learn. They're not going to be able to take advantage of China's new economic opportunities. So what's wrong? It's children, youth, young adults, working age, rural kids. They've never been to high school. They're not going to high school. They got one and one choice only: the informal, low wage, low skill labor force. And what happens when that fills up with people? We've seen it happen over and over again around the world, right? High crime, social unrest, the informal economy pulling down the formal economy. That's the danger of this invisible China. Our book has discussion on many sources of these rural things. I hope you buy the book and learn about that. The source of these problems is China's decentralized fiscal system. Oh, it's just like the U.S., right, where we have a decentralized fiscal system for supporting schools. That's where our schools are so unequal. Unsatisfied teachers, no software, blah, blah, blah. And so it makes learning in junior high, elementary school, early childhood development China's invisible challenge. It's those invisible, and I think the government knows they have a problem. I don't think they know the source of that problem, right? And I think that, that's why we wrote the book. And we, because as well as I know, if China's government figures out there's a problem and they really think it's a problem, they're going to do something about it. So I could keep going on and on, Scott, and the rest of the audience. Thank you for listening. Probably asking more relevant questions would be a good use of our time. Thank you very much.
Well, terrific. Professor Rosell, that's really fantastic introduction to the book. Extremely powerful, extremely important, and I would say very different from what folks hear inside the Beltway often about China. And so let's get on then with the conversation. We've had audience submit questions. I've thought of a few myself and mix them together so that we can have a conversation that pulls the different aspects of the book together. Let me, if you wouldn't mind, first, just actually this autobiographical question about you. If you could talk a little bit about what it's like to do research and travel and be in rural China. You started going, you said, in the early 1980s, now almost 40 years later. We know that this year is special, that this year it's difficult to get on a plane and get to rural China for you. But maybe if you bring the story, if you compare what it was like when you first were going to rural China or 20 years ago to what it was like last year, what's the experience like been for you over that time?
Yes. It's very, very different. You saw the bus and the eating in the inns, and we spent lots and lots of lots of time in the back of buses. It's called long rides, tough hides, right? And it was extremely poor. It was hard to get anywhere. Villages, there was no communications. I remember that if we were doing a survey, we had two teams in two different counties. You had to walk into the telephone company's office in the county seat and send a telegram to the county in just the next county over, right? Which would would have taken 5 or 6 hours by bus to get to, but you had to send a telegram, and then they had to take the telegram to them. People were very, very, very nice, but they would come up and touch you, they'd never even seen a foreigner. Maybe on a few movies they'd seen, but okay. And of course we'd stayed in horrible conditions. They were dirty. They were no hot water, et cetera, et cetera. Today it's not that hard doing work in rural China anymore, right? You stay in the county seat. The county seats have been built up. I mean, the county seats, I have these photos of these county seats that are beautiful. They got plazas, and they have, beautiful parks, and they have walking streets to the middle of them. Not many people live there. They've invested a lot of money in these sort of small little urban cities. I mean, and just to understand, China has 2,000 counties and the United States has 2,000 counties. So if you think about these little tiny counties in Missouri or Iowa or Oklahoma, every one of those little tiny county streets in China has been built up to be a beautiful urban landscape. Not always huge, but a beautiful urban landscape. And there's always a 4 or 5-star hotel in there now, and there's great roads out to the rural areas. Right? All invested by the central state. Okay. The problem is that the software, the teachers, the curriculum, the learning environment, that's all invested by the local government. So the central state has built these beautiful schools, but the school systems are still very, very weak, and the health systems are very, very weak. But it's a different China, and a lot of people benefited. I mean, so.
Yes, well, that's super helpful. What it's like to be there, and you've traveled more than anyone. Let me ask about investment in human capital, which is really a central part of the book and your career. And the story which you paint is one of extreme inequality in access to resources, human capital development. And I wonder, is the challenge in China not lack of insufficient investment or insufficient access to that investment from a certain part of the population? That is, if you were to open up the doors to access to that investment in education, in human capital, that you would see greater success amongst the rural Chinese population. And so that is, in Chinese terms, that's talking about the household registration system. And if you could eliminate that barrier, people could vote by their feet and go where there are educational resources and human capital investments, and then make that spur others in rural China to make the similar kinds of investments. In the US, we have the same kind of conversation about school choice. We say we should let people go to schools not in their local community, but wherever they can get a good education, and then that will spur improvements in those places' education. Would that Tiff Roberts, we had him speak in the spring about his book, The Myth of Chinese Capitalism, and he talked about the hukou system a lot. He's, as a reporter, he's one of the few reporters that spent a lot of time in rural China, not as an academic. But would you see is the key to this hukou system, or is that really a sideshow to this?
No. I mean, I think it's a key to it. Plus, what I just started motivating, it's the fiscal system that's related to that. Okay, but yeah, it's the. I always say there's 200 countries in the world, and only one country has this hukou. Maybe North Korea. Two countries have a hukou system like this, and what does every other country in the world do? Right? They encourage their kids, their population to move to the cities. right? And why? Well, there's many reasons, right? Lots of economic reasons and productivity reasons, but for provision of services of education, health, social security, et cetera, it's, much easier to provide high quality education and high quality health in cities where, good teachers want to live in the city, right? And good doctors want to live in the cities. And it's a huge problem, right? And so China basically says, you saw the population breakdown, right? 60% of China has a rural hukou. 71% of Chinese kids between the ages of 5 and 15 are rural. And they don't have any choice. They have to go to rural schools. You can pull them out of rural schools and put them into an urban school, a private migrant school, which is probably poor quality. A few schools are starting to, in county seats, are starting to accept rural kids, which is good, I think. But most of them are there. Now, what's the problem? Okay, so that's the problem. You have to go to your rural school. And so I'm going to quickly tell you the results of a survey we did. So I went to 30 of my colleagues who all had graduate students between the ages of 25 and 30. And we asked them 3 questions. 1, okay, do you keep in contact with your high school classmates? Okay, so, these 30 professors had 320 graduate students between 25 and 30. So these 300 graduate students, 300 of them said, yes, I keep in contact with my high school students. Everybody in China keeps in contact with their 同学, with their fellow students. Okay, 1. 2, how many of your high school classmates were rural? Okay, it was about 60% of them. Okay, so some of these graduate students were from Shanghai. They had no rural classmates, but on average, there was 60% of them had classmates who were from rural China. Then we asked, of the classmates from rural China, who were from rural China, how many are in their own county today? And it was 7%. Okay, so what happens is these local governments invest into the rural schools. They educate their kids until they're in high school or beyond, and then the kids all leave, and they go to they don't come back. So if you were a county where fiscal resources are already scarce, why would you ever invest in a rural school? Because your investment's going to go. You're not going to benefit. So I think that this is a huge basic problem, is the hukou system in general. We should be educating those kids in the city, number 1. 2, if you're going to make them be educated in the rural areas, the central government has to take 100% priority, 100% responsibility for those kids. So,
okay, super helpful. Let me ask one other question about sort of the sources of the problem historically and now. You talked about automation, right? And China is now a world leader in robotics. They manufacture more robotic equipment and have installed it in more parts of China than just about any other country, even compared to the United States. It's amazing. I went to one of China's huge, most famous factories, and I thought I'd see thousands of workers, and what I saw was a few workers sweeping the floor while the machines were doing the work. So tell us a little bit about what automation means for China's inequality gap, and is there any way to use the additional or savings and efficiencies from automation to help these rural Chinese work in other professions, in service professions or other places outside of factories?
Those are two big questions. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's great questions, and as you saw, this is part of the source of the problem, right? That I introduced very quickly. By the way, I take the factories that I visited are different than your factories. You said you saw some workers sweeping the floor. In the factories I went to, there were robots sweeping the floor. And so the workers, there weren't any work. And I mean, these factories went from 20,000 workers in these huge factories to, 250. And the 20,000 workers were all rural hukou. They were poorly educated, and they were replaced by 250 college grads who were computer science majors. And they just, of course, they just let the workers go. And you saw what happens, right? The workers leave those manufacturing jobs and they get dumped into this informal economy, right? And they start to, to collect recyclables, to sell fruit on the street, and to do the tan fan jingji, right? Like Li Keqiang got in real trouble for saying we ought to have more informal economy. You know why? Because Li Keqiang knows that these guys aren't going to have a job if these informal jobs aren't allowed to rise, right? And so this is extreme. This is at the source of the problem. And the fact is it's happening. Yes, there's an incentive from the factory, from the factories to do this, but the government has initiated it. What they, and you can think of what their idea is I don't want my factories to move to Bangladesh or Ethiopia. I want to keep them home. I want the value added to stay in China. Right. And so we couldn't have done this 40 years ago, right, in the United States and let our manufacturing go to Taiwan, South Korea, and Singapore and Hong Kong, because there wasn't the automation level there is now. Right. And so that's what's doing it. It's government initiated, government supported, firm collaborating automation, and it's going very fast, and it's going to keep going. Now, the question is do we get lots of savings, and do we invest those savings back into the rural people? They're going to have to. And, right now with COVID, we can talk a little about this later, but with COVID-19, right, huge unemployment in March, April, May, June in the rural economy. There's zero unemployment insurance for rural people, for the informal economy, right? They're informal. They don't have benefits. There's no unemployment insurance, right? Retraining, right? What's happening with it? There's nobody to retrain. Now, the question is, can we take the excess profits and invest it back in? I mean, my one suggestion is, China discovers what the invisible problem is all about, right? 0 to 3 cognition, bad, low quality preschools, health and nutrition problems in elementary school, the need for special ed in junior high. All that should be centrally government investment starting now, right? Adult retraining. This will be the last thing I say. The thing is we're going to have unemployment. We can help the kids as they're going through the system now. Well, what about everybody who's 20 to 65 who are already out of the school system? Can we help them? Adult training is really, really hard to do, especially if you don't have the cognitive skills and learning basis foundation to support additional learning. So yes, that's what the government has to do, to use these excess earnings to reinvest into this and to stop it now. I think if they figure out there's a problem, they'll do it.
That's super helpful. Today Xi Jinping was in Shenzhen and gave a speech about self-reliance and high tech and the dual circulation economy. I think if you were giving the speech and you were China's leader, the text would have been written a little bit differently, I expect. Maybe we can come back to that a little bit. We've got an overwhelming number of questions about the details of rural China and the educational system, and I'm going to try to come back to that a little bit. But there are also a lot of questions coming in about the implications of all of this and what it means for China's trajectory and its relationship with the United States and the rest of the world. So for Americans, and for folks in DC, where I would say you're fortunate not to be right now, there's a great worry about China's growing power and international assertiveness. There's a lot less concern that China's going to fail, right? It's the upside concern that folks have. Maybe they should be reassured by Scott, by your book, because this is China running into problems. This is the downside. This is not China as a superpower competitor. This is China as suffering from its own internal issues, and then less of a external threat. So there is that. So I want to just sort of paint two levels of question. So there's one question sort of about China as a nation state, international power. What does this mean? The second one is about these people that you've been focused on. What does a China that is facing, what do rural Chinese facing this problem look like in terms of, are they going to be engaging in more civil unrest, protest, acting up domestically? Are they dangerous to domestic peace and tranquility? And what about internationally? Are rural Chinese who don't have opportunities ironically more nationalistic about defending China's honor internationally vis-a-vis the U.S. on issues like Taiwan, et cetera? So how should the U.S. think sort of in macro terms about the China challenge of one that's facing problems versus the one that we think about as a superpower competitor? And then what do we think about, and what's the story from the perspective of rural Chinese in terms of how they act socially in society and in terms of their own views about China's place in the world? Sorry, that's a huge.
No, it's great. I'm going to answer the two questions separate, and I want to try to be really clear. Hasn't China already made it, right? And I think the answer is absolutely no. Okay, I mean, China is a middle-income country, right? I mean, China GDP per capita, it's 70th in the world, right? And it has every country has lots and lots and lots of problems, and China does too, okay? You saw it, most of the lots and lots and lots of countries who are middle income and have lots and lots of problems don't make it, okay? Now, here's the difference, right? What happens when Colombia goes up, up, up and falls? Or what happens when, Thailand goes up, up, up and falls? You know what? We don't feel it in the United States or Europe. The world economy isn't affected by, Peru having a recession, right? And so, but I think China, have a big recession, stagnation, fall. We're going to feel it economically. Okay. And of course, that's what we're fighting with now. Do we want the benefit from running in China? Do we want or do we want do we want to head that off and keep them from being a superpower? I don't think there's I don't want to talk about anything else of how you become a high-tech economy with the centrally planned economy, with the information flows of what they are, blah, 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 blah. I'm talking about the human capital on top of all those problems. I want China to make it, to at least not collapse. And because I think that if they did collapse, we would feel it economically. And like I said in my thing, that there could be other problems, right, that might go on. What happens when the Soviet Union collapsed? Thank goodness Gorbachev was in power and he peacefully transferred to a post-Soviet economy, right? And will Gorbachev be in power if that happened with China, right? That's a huge problem. So I don't think, I'm not a political scientist, but what I want And what I think what has to happen is, I know China doesn't play fair. I know that there's all kinds of behavioral problems of China dealing with the world and the trade system and the political system. I think what needs to happen, and this is, I'll keep it very short because I'm not an expert in this. I think the whole world needs to come together. The EU, the US, Australia, Japan, Canada, New Zealand, Singapore. We need to come together and come to China and say, we want to coexist with you. We want to collaborate with you. We need a new set of rules. You need to abide by it. We need to abide by it. We have to make them fair for you, but we have to be fair for us. And let's go about this together. And, let's try to keep our supply chains going and everything. I hope that the new administration, whoever they are, takes the leadership in the world and does that. Okay. Because I think a falling China is really dangerous, very dangerous. Okay. So let's go to the second part of the question. Okay. I think it's clear. I mean, I don't think, because there's no voting system, because rural Chinese don't have a vote, they aren't going to do civil unrest. Okay. What they're going to do is they're going to organize crime. They're going to come together. Right now, for 40 years, their lives are getting better and better and better. And they're still low income. They aren't poverty, but they're low income, and they spend hours and hours and hours. And, they ask themselves, should I go into crime or should I stay in this informal job and, collect trash and go stuff? And guess what? Until now, the answer has been, I'm going to stay and work hard and try to make my life better, even though I'm low income, and I've got better and better. And I think the future will be better. Okay. That's what people have decided. But when you saw the wages are falling, you saw benefits are falling, right? And when if that continues to fall, you're going to get people that are going to say, should I go into crime or should I stay in this informal job? And sooner or later, that balance is going to start tipping. And I think we're going to see a big rise of social unrest and of crime and I think then of course the government's going to respond, right? And there's going to be crackdowns, and the informal economy is going to fall again. And I think in 1980 there was almost no crime in Mexico. Look at it today. I mean, I think that's where we look at for sort of what is possible to happen. So. I could go on, but let me.
That's fine. Just that is both helpful on sort of the macro level and the individual level. Can you say a little bit more just about because you've met so many rural Chinese youths and others about their views of the West, the United States? What's growing tensions mean? Are they obviously are folks that have a strong sense of themselves, and they pull themselves up by their bootstraps. They don't depend on anyone because there's no one's offering them that. But what do they think about the world? And if you can ever talk about those things, or what do you take away from those conversations, or things that show up in the surveys?
Yeah, no, they don't think very much about the world. I mean, they think they have very, very few views of it. They worry about their jobs. They worry about peace and prosperity, right? They worry. They worry about whatever access they have to education and health. They worry a lot about those things. They have very, very little views. They aren't nationalistic in any sense of the way, like I think the urban population is becoming more and more nationalistic, right? That's so far away from their lives. Now, where do they get their information from? Do they support the current leadership? Absolutely, right? I mean, I mean, you guys, everybody here knows, right? The 7 p.m. hour is the news hour, and it's 10 minutes of how hard the workers are, how hard the leaders are working, 10 minutes on everything that's going great in China today, and then 10 minutes on how horrible the rest of the world is, right? And that has shaped their vision. They think they're very lucky to be Chinese, right? And they revere the leadership. And of course, there's zero, they have no access to alternative sources of information at all. So they don't even think, if you ask them, what do you think about the U.S.-China U.S.-China relationships? They go, they'll tell you right out, it has nothing to do with me. I don't know anything about it. They're very nationalistic, but they're super focused on themselves, right? They're low income, right? That they need to figure out how to, work hard, save enough money so they can support themselves in retirement because there's no Social Security. They support themselves for catastrophic illnesses because there's no catastrophic illness coverage, and they need to get their sons married. And because there's a huge sex imbalance. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that they aren't going to play a big. Nobody listens to their opinion when they try to make policy in the government either, because they know they don't matter in this totalitarian, authoritarian system.
Well, it sounds like they may be not very visible to Americans. They may be invisible to China's leaders in Shanghai.
That's why they don't care about them, right? So
yeah. So the you talked about the educational gaps all along the way in this vicious cycle. In the United States, we talk now a lot about the challenges of globalization, the loss of manufacturing jobs to China, and China's losing them to other places, and the need for worker retraining. That the big argument that you hear in Washington is that over the last 20 years, as the U.S. opened up to China, it didn't protect workers who were in good paying jobs, and then didn't help them transition to others. And so that's hurt. I think what you're describing is a similar type of challenge in China. Can you compare and contrast adult education, retraining needs and systems? Is there anything that we have that they could learn, or vice versa? Should we all be looking at vocational systems of Germany and others to borrow from?
Yeah. This is, I have lots of opinions on it. First of all, if you don't educate the person when they're young, adult education doesn't work at all. Zero. There's almost no successful adult education programs in the world. You know what the best adult education in the world is? Adult education program in the world? It's the United States, our community college system. Okay? And the reason it's successful is because everyone in the US goes to college. 80% of the people start college, and half of them drop out. Okay, because tuition's so high and everything, and then they go get a job, they start a family, and suddenly they realize, God, I need a skill to pass it, to survive here in the United States. And they go back to the community college and they get another technical training or professional training or whatever they get, and it's fantastic. It's been a great system. But who benefits from our adult training in the United States? It's people who've already been to college, even college grads. And you have to have if you're 30 years old and you have a family and you're busy, and now I want you to go back to school to learn something that's really technical, oh my God, and you're not going to be able to learn it. unless you have like Europe, where you give people 2 years of full income, or half income, or whatever they give them for retraining, and then put them back in school, right? So now. So I think adult training in the United States, I think adult training in China, if you haven't trained them as kids, it's not going to work. Okay. Now, we could try, and we could, and if you need to buy out their time and that kind of stuff. So that's number one. Two is, will vocational training when they're in school, in high school, is that better than academic training? Too long to talk about here, Scott, but the fact is that the people who do the best in high income countries are those who have been to academic high school, have learned reading, writing, math, computers, science, and they're able to learn how to learn. And I think that I don't care if Chinese vocational schools teach math, Chinese, language, computers, and science, that's fine. They aren't now, but if they did, it would be fine. That's what they need to teach, because every one of those vocational school jobs that they're training kids for, they don't exist 10 years from now. And so if you don't have the skills to learn how to learn, you're going to be in trouble. So that's why I think China faces a big, big challenge. I think they can take today's youth and improve them, but you still have 400 million people who are past the stage that they can learn anything. And
well, Scott, this has been a fantastic discussion with you. I take away one big word from this: passion. You are passionate about China and education. I think that actually reflects the views of many of my Chinese friends and many listening today. We know that Chinese care deeply about education, right? And people go to great lengths to save money, help prepare their kids for the college entrance exams, send their kids abroad. It is seen as the ticket to social mobility and success. And I think that's really important. I think it's right. And speaking as someone who used to be a professor and a lifelong student, I would agree with them. And I think what you've done is provided us a passionate introduction through your work and this book that you wrote with Natalie on the biggest challenges that China face and that all of us face for having a successful society. Solving the China riddle is not going to be easy for America or for China. I think the suggestions that you have, coupled with your analysis, suggest that there is a path for China. It's not going to be an easy one, and there may even be a path for U.S.-China relations, but it's going to take a long amount of work, not solved easily, not solved on a single day's election or a single speech that Xi Jinping gives in one city or another. So we are going to need to continue to pay attention to this for a long time. I want to thank you for your contribution to our knowledge through this book and your career. It's really been an honor to speak with you today and to have you share your research and views and your passion with us.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you to everyone. I mean, and the last word I have is, I think it's to all of our benefit that we do work together, U.S.-China relations, that the whole world would be better off if we learn to get along and get along fairly. So thanks for having this. CSIS is so valuable, and thanks for inviting me.
We really appreciate it. I want to thank my team at CSIS program, the trustee chair, Alyssa Scherning, also the folks at CSIS who put together this event, Clifton and others who work so hard every day to bring these programs to everyone. So thanks everyone for joining. Hope you have a great day. Go out and read Invisible China. Take care, everybody. Cheers.
Thank you.